Your boss.
So let's do some definitions.
Well, as you guys know, Senator Sandoval hasn't been charged with anything. Senator Cullerton has. Senator Arroyo's been charged. So there's all different various degrees here.
While Senator Sandoval is under investigation, it's in the best interests of our state that he no longer serve as chairman of the Transportation Committee.
You ever think to yourself when you're doing business, this guy might be wearing a wire?
I never say anything where it would matter. So, certainly it seems like some sprawling investigation here. So, I'm wearing the wire you gave me. But
Senator, are you saying you are not wear a wire?
Why don't you ask them where they got their source? Why don't you ask them?
You're saying they're both.
Why don't you?
Are you
Why
denying
don't try? Hey, I've been around a long time. I know how people like twist my words. I'm not going to twist the word. I'm not.
We might even expand this to cover some of the more controversial issues about, maybe news organizations, who funds them, that sort of thing.
A moment caught on some kind of surreptitious recording. Can you respond to that?
It's a tough world we live in.
Gonna start all over again?
Sure, yeah. Greg Bishop here in my home office. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a radio reporter for the Center Square and Illinois Radio Network. I focus on what's happening at the Illinois State House. I've written hundreds of stories while running around the state capitol, reading legislation, talking to lawmakers, and sitting through committee hearings. 2019 has been quite the year, with all that's happened from increased taxes, cannabis legalization, the largest state budget to date in Illinois, and countless other big policy changes in state government. 2019 was also a year of major ethical questions. If you stick around, I'll share with you some of the moments from the past year, and the reaction state leaders had in the aftermath of allegations of corrupt elected officials. But we start with a warning from former Governor Bruce Rauner. In January, he raised concerns over House Speaker Michael Madigan having power over legislation dealing with property taxes when he works with a law firm that deals with property tax disputes.
I hope and am strongly encouraging members of the General Assembly to stand up to the leaders in their caucus and pass legislation to support term limits, fair maps, and elimination of property tax appeals work by legislators. This is critically important ethical reform, good government reform, and we recommend that is in the most strongest terms.
Governor J.B. Pritzker responded to those concerns as he took over the executive office.
Well, I've said for a long time that as a citizen legislature exists, and that's also the case in other bodies that are elected across the state, that people hold outside jobs. And when they do that, there is the potential for conflicts of interest. And that is where we need to make sure that people are either abstaining from the activity on the outside that would interfere with their ability to do their job that they're elected to do and do it ethically, or abstaining from being involved in it in any way in government. So it's one or the other, but you can't be, in my view, it's improper for people to be voting on issues that are directly affecting their income, their industry, their personal well-being in terms of money making.
Pritzker, who's reportedly worth more than $3 billion, spent more than $165 million in running for the job. Questions of ethics were raised in the first few weeks of Pritzker's administration, as it was revealed he was doubling his top staff's salary with private money through an LLC.
Will your LLC be open to FOIA to be transparent, so to speak, whenever you are doubling up the pay for your top staff?
We've been transparent and we've responded to all the FOIA requests that we've received.
Great, thank you.
Governor Pritzker ran on saying he was going to have the most transparent governor's office in the Illinois history, and one of his first steps is to actually set up a process that is the least transparent when it comes to offshoring or privatizing, doubling staff payroll. It would have been more transparent for him to run it through his campaign account, where at least you have quarterly reporting, you can see inflows and outflows. This way, no one can see where the money is coming from, nor how it is being distributed. Well, they're going to be loyal to the people that's writing the biggest check. And unfortunately, that's all too common in Illinois politics, is people are in it for themselves and not doing what's right. So they're going to make a substantial sum of money. We will not have any disclosure on where and how the money's being dispersed, and they get rich and go all the way to the bank with it.
And how do we change this? How do we correct it?
We have reporters keep hounding them on the topic.
Chicago Tribune reported in December that the governor has spent more than $3 million. 2019 also started with what seems to be a regular occurrence anytime I interact with House Speaker Michael Madigan. Through most of 2018, anytime Madigan made himself available to a group of media, he would train his focus initially on me, incorrectly asserting who he thinks my employer is. That continued this year.
So what can we expect for
Which one is from the Policy Institute?
Right here.
Right here?
Illinois News Network.
And you live in Lincoln Tower?
We're neighbors.
Are these intimidation?
Are these intimidation techniques?
Yeah, right.
Only if you want it to be.
Speaker, you got a few moments? How are you? All right. So
He gets paranoid, so don't
why don't you
bother.
mix up with somebody else? I'm not paranoid.
Your boss is.
So let's do some definitions.
Okay.
If I interact with you and I ask about your background and I ask about your policy positions, do you view that as bullying?
When you point to somebody where they live, that could possibly be interpreted as such. But we can go ahead and get to the Q&A of here if that's all right.
I talked about where you live.
No, you talk about where Mark lived.
Yeah, I wasn't talking to Mark. I was talking to you.
We can relive that some other
You
time.
view that as bullying?
We can relive that some other time. So, do you anticipate moving on a minimum wage increase this week or next week?
The plan is to move this along within the next couple of weeks.
The deposition that was released, that was published, and also the questions about the whole Gonzalez case. But you also had a moment caught on some kind of surreptitious recording. Can you respond to those?
It's a tough world we live in.
There were a myriad of allegations against Madigan's political operations early in the year, including some last year from a member of his Democratic caucus claiming that the speaker had others intimidate her. There were also staffers who alleged bullying and harassment, leading to several political and state house staffers, including Madigan's chief of staff, being fired. Pritzker responded to a report released in August by a former executive inspector general about the alleged abuse within Madigan's office.
You know, what came through that report was a special kind of discrimination or a special kind of harassment and intimidation from Tim Mapes. And that's really, you can't put people in positions of power who hold those kinds of views and who clearly had those views for many years, according to the report. It depends on what he knew, but I will say that it's, you shouldn't, obviously, we need to get rid of people who hold these views, and to the extent that, that it was brought forward, you can't leave people in these supervisory positions who are demonstrating this kind of bullying.
So should the speaker drop the ball then?
I think it's clear that both sides of the aisle, because you've heard this on the other side of the aisle too. Yeah. I think leadership in Springfield, everybody in Springfield in a way, we've let this culture go on too long. I mean, I showed up 7 months ago, but this culture has been around for a long time. I mean, I sometimes say this in a group of people and see lots of women's heads nod about the fact that this has been going on for far too long and people haven't been able to come forward. You all have made it possible for people to come forward and for people to be held accountable.
Just a few months into the spring legislative session, there was news the feds were looking into what Cook County officials said was Pritzker's scheme to defraud the taxpayers by misrepresenting a property.
Well, let me be clear that I'm very confident that any review of this matter will show that all the rules were followed. I have not been contacted by any law enforcement, neither has MK. And I will say that last October, my opponents raised this issue, and it became a political subject last October. Again, I just say that any review will show, as I've said before, it will show that all the rules were followed, and that's really the most important thing.
So are there no charges coming out of this whatsoever?
No concerns at all. As I say, any review of this will show that all the rules were followed.
So just wanting to be clear that
Very pleased to know that they began their investigation after the Inspector General released to the public that Governor Pritzker had schemed to defraud the taxpayers of Cook County.
After the controversy popped up during the election, Pritzker paid Cook County more than $300,000 That's the discount he got from removing a toilet from a spare mansion. Senator Jason Plummer questioned the motive behind that payment.
I don't know many people, even billionaires, that would write $300,000+ checks if they felt like they didn't do anything wrong.
We simply wanted to avoid distraction during the course of the campaign. As I say, any review of this will show that all the rules were followed. And during the campaign, it was clear that people were trying to make this a political issue. And so we just wanted to get it out of the way.
At this time, I think Governor Pritzker should immediately abandon any push to impose any more taxes on the people of Illinois.
Then there seemed to be a never-ending drip of news reports about people close to Speaker Madigan being questioned by the feds. There was a former lawmaker turned ComEd lobbyist close to Madigan who had his offices raided, reports of others being investigated, and more. This was on top of Madigan's political operation being accused of retaliating against a staffer who made accusations of sexual harassment against a supervisor. Pritzker was hit with questions seeking his reaction to the stories.
Well, as I've said before, I think we need to see this process play itself out. It's hard to tell. I know what you know, what I've read in the newspaper. So, we're going to have to see where this leads to.
Have you been contacted at all?
I have not.
That doesn't really answer the question. Do you still have confidence in Speaker Madigan?
Well, again, we're moving forward. Allegations are just that, and so we'll see. I haven't actually seen what those allegations might be. I mean, I think at this point, there are a number of people have been contacted. We've read the stories that you all have put out, but it's hard to tell what it's really all about.
And again, even more news broke as the year progressed. State Senator Tom Cullerton was charged with embezzling from a labor union. He's pleaded not guilty in his trial sometime in 2020. To this day, he's still a state senator and holds a committee chairmanship that gives him even larger lawmaker salary. Pritzker was asked if Cullerton should step down from office.
What's important is that that we find out, what the facts are, and then pursue justice against whoever it is that may have committed any acts that are against the interests of public integrity.
Steve GOP says he should step down. Should he step down?
Well, as you know, I think he stepped aside or was asked to step aside from the chairmanship of the Labor Committee, which is an area that the allegations were made in, and I think that was an appropriate first step.
He wasn't the only one that the feds were looking at. State Senator Martin Sandoval's offices were also raided. All this happened just weeks after he ushered in an infrastructure bill, but there were questions of what tax increases would pay for it. Lawmakers like State Representative Darren Bailey were not on board.
There's a downstate representative from Louisville, who has made it his point to go online and give my phone number to people, talking about, call Sandoval about, not investing in our roads and bridges and highways, and you'll hold the line on increasing the motor fuel tax. I think if that state rep doesn't necessarily want to support a capital bill and wants to continue to be hypocritical with his constituents about his value of highways, roads, bridges, and dams and waterways, maybe we could put a line in the capital bill where we bypass Edwardsville or Louisville, because that's how he really feels about it. So
the simple fact that he would come out, call me out, because he's frustrated that people are calling him up, telling him not to support this infrastructure bill, and then to go so far as to suggest that any representative or senator that doesn't vote for this, that their districts would be bypassed. These people are paying the same taxes. I mean, it's ridiculous. This is Springfield politics. This exemplifies Illinois politics.
Everything from, beer, wine, spirits, video poker, ride sharing, car sales. I think it's all on the table, and these are all ideas that have resurrected from many of my colleagues as possible revenue sources, and we're looking at all and see the viability of it all.
Where are we at on transportation, on funding infrastructure?
Gonna start all over again?
Sure, yeah. So where are we at on infrastructure?
I think we're very close on completing our negotiations in a very bipartisan way on the horizontal portion of the Capitol bill.
While Senator Sandoval is under investigation, it's in the best interests of our state that he no longer serve as chairman of the Transportation Committee. If he doesn't step aside, he should be removed. Frankly, I'm angry that there is a corruption that exists that we have to root out. We have not, the IDOT has not received any, you asked about subpoenas or search warrants, none of those. And also for the governor's office, none of those. And then I know there's reference to some IDOT employees, but as of now anyway, there's no allegation, there's no interviews that we're aware of that have been requested.
Sandoval's not been charged with anything, but he announced he's stepping down New Year's Day. There were even more reports about details of a wide-ranging federal probe into possible kickback schemes, illicit payments by lobbyists, and more. And while no charges have been leveled against Madigan, there's definitely a cloud over the House Speaker. Pritzker was asked again if he had confidence in Madigan as leader of both the Democratic Party of Illinois and leader of the Illinois House.
The kinds of things that we've seen that apparently have been now called out and even raids have taken place. Remember, though, that those actions were taken directly against Senator Sandoval. That's one of the reasons why, and they seem to be directly about transportation. And he was the chairman of the Transportation Committee. I didn't ask for him to step down from his position as senator, but he should have and did step down as chairman of the Transportation Committee while we find out the rest of the story. The same thing was true of Senator Tom Cullerton, who was chairman of the Labor Committee, and it was very clear he's been indicted. He's been indicted on issues that are specifically related to his position as chairman of the Labor Committee, or at least with regard to labor. So I've been very clear about, when there is direct action that is taken, very specifically, that is the time in which I've been willing to come forward and will always be to call out the kind of corruption that we're hearing about and reading about that you're covering. So thank you very much.
The roller coaster doesn't end there. Just as fall session was getting into full swing, more news dropped about corruption allegations, something the House Minority Leader Jim Durkin laid out.
I stand before you today with anger and utter disdain, knowing that a Democrat member of the Illinois House of Representatives, Representative Luis Arroyo, appeared before a federal magistrate at a bond hearing this morning for the following: bribing a state official in exchange for official action with the United States currency. This charge relates directly to Representative Arroyo's official duties and his oath of office.
Number one, we've been advised by Representative Arroyo's attorney that he plans to resign as the chair of the Appropriations Capital Committee. Let me say that again. We've been advised by Representative Arroyo's attorney that he plans to resign as the chair of the Appropriations Capital Committee.
Chicago Tribune reported a source saying Senator Terry Link was the senator that wore a wire in the Arroyo arrest. Link denied that.
Not the public's not bothering me. I'm getting emails from all of my constituents, very happy with me. Stick in there, fight, do whatever. And so, they're not mad at me, and that's who I don't represent you. I represent them.
Senator, are you saying you did not wear a wire?
Why don't you ask them where they got their source? Why don't you ask them?
You're saying they're both.
Why don't you?
Are you denying
don't try. Hey, I've been around a long time. I know how people like to twist my words. I'm not going to twist the word. I'm not going to twist.
Senate President John Cullerton, Governor J.B. Pritzker, Representative Lisa Hernandez, and Representative Marty Moylan all reacted.
I haven't talked to him about this, but someone said Senator Link's denied being this person, so I don't know what we're supposed to do about that. If you guys have some evidence that's not... If you guys have some evidence that he's involved, please let me know. If you have any more information than I do, I just read a report that he was supposedly the one that said he's denied it. So,
you ever think to yourself when you're doing business, this guy might be wearing a wire?
I never say anything where it would matter. So no, I don't really think about that.
We don't know who it is, so we haven't had a chance to reflect on it, really.
Well, I think you should always be cautious what you say to anybody, and just not do anything criminal.
Look, the thought about somebody wearing a warrant saddens me to no length, because for so long as a legislator, I've been in office for 14 years, my strong effort has always to build trust among the public, and when you hear of this is what kind of takes this back. Because for those who try and work in such a way to build that trust among the public, the unfortunate actions of a few really impact all.
Do I think there are other lawmakers? Could be. I mean, it seems like some sprawling investigation here. So, I'm wearing the wire you gave me, but.
What steps can the Senate take to possibly expel?
There's a whole bunch of different issues with regard to that. There's issues dealing with whether or not the activity alleged directly relates to the legislature, like taking a bribe to pass a bill, something like that, as opposed to something that's not related.
Changes that certainly have to be made, like you should not be a legislator and also be a lobbyist. And I'm not sure everybody was aware of that. And some of these legislators that have these side businesses got to be curtailed. Some of these also lobbyists that are having their spouses are in certain positions or get rewarded for doing certain legislation, that should also be stopped.
You're not pushing Sandoval or Tom Cullerton. Now, what's the difference between those cases and you and Madigan?
Well, as you guys know, Senator Sandoval hasn't been charged with anything. Senator Cullerton has. Senator Arroyo's been charged. So there's all different various degrees here. It appears that Senator Cullerton's charges do not involve the legislature. The others appear to. So that's why we need to take a common sense approach to this, which is what I'm willing to do.
As the year's legislative session was closing down, there was a scramble to get some kind of ethics legislation through. Republicans wanted a host of changes, like barring lawmakers from also being lobbyists, or giving the legislative inspector general more authority to investigate ethics violations without having to get permission from a panel of lawmakers. In the final days of session, Senate President John Cullerton was still unclear what ethical reforms were going to advance.
Again, the ethics, I'm going to...
Okay, let's get down to this ethics.
Sure.
And what is your question? Why are we not voting on a bill tonight? Because it hasn't been filed yet. Something on ethics will pass.
Is there enough time?
Yes, absolutely.
Explain that, please.
Because you can pass a bill in one day in the veto session if you have enough vehicles, and we do.
And
I can guarantee you...
What do you want to see happen?
Well,
I
mentioned before we should have some kind of a joint committee. That's something at a minimum, and see if we can pass any low-hanging fruit. But they hasn't been negotiated yet.
The General Assembly has a history of using task forces as nothing more than a mechanism to delay and defer and distract the public from the reforms that are very real and able to be implemented now.
So I know that this is really important for you to have this now, but I'm just curious if you... I can't answer the question any better than that. I don't have a final version to tell you about.
Does the low-hanging fruit...
We're not stalling. We're trying to agree, but we haven't come to an agreement yet. People have different opinions.
There's been identification of what we would call low-hanging fruit, things that are very, I think, easy, should be easy for the legislature to do. For example, the Inspector General has requested some very specific authority, has indicated that's vitally necessary for her to be able to do her job. Senate Republicans introduced that legislation. Senator Berrickman did 2 weeks ago. We've heard no response in regards to that. I think at the end of the day, it's part of restoring the public's trust is ensuring you don't have the fox guarding the hen house. That's whether it's at the State Board of Elections or whether that's here inside of our own chamber. We need to address this issue, and there's ways in which we could be doing that today.
You see what I'm saying? You've got low-hanging fruit, if you want to call it that. And people have different definitions of what that is. We're passing today, hopefully, and then you've got the commission that would study recommendations for other legislation.
One of the elements about lobbyists is we've seen it time and again, kind of that revolving door of lawmakers not being lawmakers anymore and then going to be lobbyists. Why not have a cool down?
I think that's a good idea that the commission would. We might even expand this to cover some of the more controversial issues about maybe news organizations and who funds them, that sort of thing, because fake news could be something else that we might be undermining democracy. So that could be expanded as well.
How could somebody being a reporter,
I don't know,
exercising their First Amendment, free press, undermine democracy?
It's just to be studied, that's all. Something that the task force could study. Okay, any more questions? All right, thanks.
Just hours after that exchange I had with the Senate president, he announced he's retiring in January. Before leaving for the year, Illinois lawmakers did pass a bill requiring the Secretary of State list all lobbyists and how much they give lawmakers. Lawmakers also created a commission on ethics and lobbying reforms, with the proposal due in March. But then there were more reports about what the federal government was looking into in a widespread probe. Just weeks before the end of the year, the governor was again questioned about the alleged corruption and whether he's talked to Speaker Madigan about it.
Have you talked to Speaker Madigan about this federal investigation that's going on to combat lobbying, and in which his own name has been listed on subpoenas?
I have not.
Why not?
It's not something that comes up. We honestly, the times when I do speak with the Speaker, it's about legislation that I'm trying to get through. Sometimes he agrees with me, sometimes he disagrees with me. So those are the kinds of things that we talk about.
Something this big and far-reaching, don't you think that should be a conversation, especially considering it might impact what comes up next year?
Look, the Speaker, the Speaker knows where I stand on all of these matters related to corruption. I believe strongly that we need to address these issues. We need to make sure that we're putting forward legislation to deal with the ethical lapses, the crimes that seem to have been committed, and I intend to be out front, as I have been, talking about and advocating for significant changes in our ethics laws.
Let me ask you this then. What do you think of a sitting state senator, wearing a wire against a state representative?
We have got to root out the corruption in this state. I understand that there may be people who are upset hearing that someone's walking around with a wire, but there's too much at stake. What?
Are you upset that the senator was wearing a wire?
I'm upset that there are people who have acted in a corrupt fashion in our government, that in the legislature. They should be rooted out. I want them out of government. They don't deserve to hold public office. There is a public trust. When you get elected to public office, there is a public trust that you carry. People expect you to do the right thing, to follow the law, and to carry their interests at all times, not your own personal interests. And the people who are being caught and indicted, I assume if they are convicted, these are people who do not deserve to carry with them the title of elected office holder in the state of Illinois. Thank you very much.
That was a lot, but it's no way all of what happened in 2019. There's sure to be even more revelations and reaction as state lawmakers head back to session later this year. If you'd like to follow along with my coverage, you can visit bishoponair.com and catch my news reports through thecentersquare.com or on an Illinois Radio Network affiliate. Here's to exercising the freedom of the press in 2020.